It is the Friday Wrestling Observer Radio. Garrett and Dave here. We are pre-recording this on Thursday night. By the time people listen, will you already be on vacation? Will you be on a plane? Where
I'll
will you be?
be by the time well, I mean in the morning I'll be on a plane.
Okay.
You know, if you're listening at the regular time you usually listen, I'll be on vacation by then. Yeah.
We'll probably put this up a little bit earlier too for folks since we have it. All right, Hall of Fame season. Before we get to that, though, I just want to say at the end of this show will be an interview with Raven, whose documentary hits Amazon Prime next week, and we both got to see it. It's really good. So after we talk about Hall of Fame, then we will play the interview with Raven. All right, so who made it?
Who made it? Spiros Arion, Gran Hamada, Dorel Dixon, CM Punk, Cody Rhodes, Sabu, and Bobby Bruns, who I mean there's no, you know, I'm not stunned at any of them. Punk, I mean Sabu's an interesting one because he wasn't even on the ballot for years. You know, he had been on the ballot, had not gotten much support, passed away, and there's always, you know, some people pass away and there's, you know, it doesn't really change anything. When he passed away, it was kind of like one of those things where it's like he really changed wrestling. And once you think about that, how much he changed wrestling, you know, it changed kind of how you look at it. When we did the Hall of Fame show a couple of weeks ago, well, actually we did a series of shows, you know, we talked a lot about Sabu, and you know, he was in there, you know, I mean, as far as Arion, we talked a lot about Hamada, you know, obviously, you know, the thing with Hamada to me, Gran Hamada was a fantastic wrestler. You know, he wrestled in Japan. Most of his career was in Mexico, you know, where his size wasn't the disadvantage that it would be in the United States. You know, he's a short guy, big, you know, big body, you know, real muscular, but super agile and just super timing, like really one of the best wrestlers there was. When you kind of like looked at his whole career, you really see that while like he on his own, he's not Paraguayo, he's Paraguayo's opponent type of a thing. That's what his role was. But he was in a lot of big matches. And, you know, it really was a Hall of Fame career. Dorel Dixon's a really interesting one. And this issue actually, I was really happy in this issue. Also, I'll bring up Raul Poli in just a second, but Dorel Dixon, I really got to look at his career kind of in depth. And, you know, I would not vote for him for the Hall of Fame. I saw him like I think I mentioned before, like when I guess I would have been 12 years old when he was in Los Angeles with Earl Maynard as as tag team champions. You know, he was like my favorite wrestler. You know, you know, he had a lot of charisma and you know, great physique and all that. I don't even know why, but he was. And but I would have never considered him as a Hall of Famer. And I mean, it's an interesting career. I don't think it's like a slam dunk Hall of Fame case, but you know, one of the things, he was the first black main eventer in Mexico, and he was a main eventer from, you know, 56 to 80 pretty significantly. He did have some very good runs in the United States. You know, he had I think it was 3 Madison Square Garden main events when he would have been this was in 62, 63. And you know, for a guy his size, because he was not a big guy, you know, he was a light heavyweight, to go to the WWF, you know, he was actually there prior to it being called WWF. But he's, interestingly enough, and I didn't even know this, the first, you know, like Buddy Rogers was the NWA champion, and he defended it against Dorel Dixon in 62, late 62. They did a double count out, you know, probably building for a rematch. You know, then the next Garden show, he was in the main event against Johnny Barend, where he beat Johnny Barend. And that was obviously to build up for the rematch, because Buddy Rogers was not in that show. He was wrestling elsewhere. Maybe, I have to look at the date. He may have even been when he was injured. I didn't even think about that, because he broke his ankle against Killer Kowalski around that time. So he's not on the show. So Dixon gets a win. Maybe if he wasn't hurt, he would have been on that show, and that would have been the blow-off match. So then, there's when Rogers is back from his injury, I think he first wrestles Kowalski because of that injury thing. And Dixon and Bobo Brazil, I think, had a tag match, on that show. And then they went to the blow-off with the Buddy Rogers and Dixon match. And by this time, Fez had beaten Buddy Rogers for the NWA title. So in Ohio, they created this WWWA championship because they didn't want to recognize Fez because, Rogers was a bigger draw, and there was a lot of political issues going on in 62 and 62, which led to the decision in 63 to make Fez champion. It was a lot. And so a lot of, most promoters didn't want Rogers as champion because Vince McMahon's father was booking him, and he would book him like 15 days out of the month in the Northeast. So, some promoter, the bigger promoters would still, Chicago, St. Louis, those markets would still get Rogers. Texas, I think, probably Montreal, those places would still get Rogers, but your Amarillos and your Calgarys and places like that, Georgia's, they weren't getting Rogers. So they were mad. Even though Rogers was a great drawing card and a great star, they weren't getting dates, and they're NWA members, or were not getting dates, and Rogers didn't really want to work there. And there's a big showdown with McMahon, the father, and Mushnick. And in the end, they got Buddy Rogers in the ring in Toronto, and Lou Thesz beat him to be champion. And then the Northeast and Ohio, those promoters, Rogers made his name in Ohio. He was based there for a while. And then Vince Sr., Rogers was a big star there. Thesz was not. So he didn't want to use Thesz. So they created the WWWA championship in Ohio, which Dixon won from Rogers. And then the WWF championship, WWF, 3 Ws. And the first Madison Square Garden WWF championship match was Rogers defending against Dixon, which Rogers won. And then Dixon stuck around. Him and Bobo Brazil were a major tag team for, about a year. He was a big star in Texas. But most of his success would have been Mexico, mostly as a babyface. Some, he had some heel runs, where he took on the baby faces. He was on the very first UWA show, which was like the promotion that broke away from EMLL, which is now CMLL. That would be in 75. So it was January 29th, 75. It was Connect, Doriel Dixon, and Sonny Warcloud against Mil Mascaras, I believe Santo, and Solitario, which is like a dream team at Plaza de Toros. So he was in, the first match to create a new promotion. He was there, and he headlined, he was one of the big stars of the UWA, as he had been for EMLL for, about till about 80. And from there, he still wrestled till 87, but was not a main eventer after, 1980 was probably his last run as a main eventer. But he it was very interesting, researching his career and the big matches he's had and everything like that. I mean, he's certainly, like, when you read it, it's not like he's someone who doesn't deserve it or anything like that. I don't think he's, he got 74% of the vote this year, which is very, very high. But, people, it just was one of those things, the Mexican ballot, everybody voted for Hamada and Dixon almost all together. Then they voted for different other people or no other people. A lot of people just voted for those two, but they were like a pack. Punk, Rhodes, and Sabu were like a pack in a lot of ways, as far as like people voting for them all together. Bobby Bruns needed to be in, and it's pretty much explained in the story in the Observer why he needed to be in. I've said that for years. And sometimes when it comes to these guys that people, they're not names to modern people, so it takes a couple of years of research before people start research, and then you kind of go, oh, you know what, he really needs to be in. I think the same thing with Jose Torres, who actually only came a couple votes short, but he started like very low, and each year he grew and grew and grew. And now, I think there's a good shot he'll go in next year. But he was the biggest star ever in Spain. But his name isn't really, and drew very, very, huge for decades. but his name isn't that big, to modern fans. So it takes a lot. I think George Kidd was the same way. So you kind of have, that's kind of like the cycle, and Torres is almost there. Bobby Bruns, who was really, in many ways the architect of Japanese pro wrestling. We talked a lot about Ricky Dozan in the article as well. So he's there. And then the other person inducted was Raul Paoli, who was a promoter in France, the major promoter in France from the 1930s, when it was Henri Deglaine, who was an Olympic gold medalist, who was actually a star in Montreal and a world champion. He had the original Montreal Screwjob was Andre Deglaine and Strangler Lewis for the world championship, where, as the story goes, what was it? In between falls, I believe it was, Henri Deglaine had somebody bite him in the chest, and they blamed it on Lewis, and Lewis was disqualified, and that's how they took the championship from him. And then, after his world title run was over, I think he lost to Ed Don George. He went to France, and Raul Paoli, who was an amazing athlete, one of the better all-around athletes probably in the history of pro wrestling, but he was never a big star as a pro wrestler because he was in the Olympics, year after year after year. He was in the Olympics he actually won a bronze medal in the Olympics at the age of 12 as part of the rowing team. And then he came back, and he was best sports were shot put, discus, things like that. But he, he was a rugby star. I mean, he was just a great all-around athlete of that era. By the time he got to pro wrestling, he was already in his 40s, so it was too late for him. He didn't really know about it. He actually came to the United States to be an actor. He was an actor in France, and then decided, going to go to Hollywood. He was in movies and things in the late 20s, but was not not a big movie star or anything. And while he was in the United States, he learned about pro wrestling from Henri Deglaine, who was also an Olympian gold medalist who he knew from France, and got him into pro wrestling. And he did it a little while, and then, kind of decided, like, I can export this thing to France. And so he brought Henri Deglaine, and a lot of the top guys came. Him and Dan Kolov from Bulgaria were like the two big draws early on, but they brought in Strangler Lewis, and Lou Thez came in, much later. And, a lot of the biggest stars would come in, through Steve Casey. What was the guy in the 50s? Frank Sexton. Deglaine was there, for a long, long time. They had an Olympic weightlifter, I think Olympic gold medalist in weightlifting, who was from France, who was, also one of their big stars. And, he promoted until 59-ish, I would say. So from like the mid 30s to 59, and, was the best promoter they ever had in France. And France went through its ups and downs with everything. But so he's also in. So that's the class of 2025.
When you were talking about the Sabu influence, and then you watch Wednesday night's Blood and Guts, like, the influence is right there.
Oh yeah, I know. I mean, it's like that thing. Well, I mean, the Blood and Guts comes from like the the death match stuff, which was inspired by Sabu. It didn't, we didn't have death match wrestling promotions then. I mean, FMW and Onita kind of inspired Paul Heyman and ECW, and then ECW kind of went, ECW was not a deathmatch promotion, but they did matches like that. They introduced the barbed wire and things like that. And Sabu was a pioneer. But yeah, it's like, I'm not necessarily even a fan of that direction, but that direction, I mean, it's a direction, and it's a direction the business has taken, and it's popular. And he was the guy, I mean, it's like Randy Orton, we said this before in the show, even, Randy Orton was a much, much, much bigger star than Sabu ever was or ever would have been. But although Sabu was a big star for a couple of years there, but you take Randy Orton out of WWE, history of wrestling is identical. It doesn't change anything. You take Sabu out, and I don't know that Sabu was that linchpin catalyst for ECW. I don't know that I don't know that maybe Mick Foley was a big star, and great talker and everything, and Public Enemy did the tables after a while, but I think that Sabu was the one who really popularized it. I mean, and obviously people think that because he got in, and it's not easy to get in, that's for sure, especially for the modern category, modern US and Canada category, because that to me is like, that's the real tough category, because the older guys, most of the best ones were in from the beginning, and so the ones that were voted on from that point forward were a lot more borderline guys, whereas the modern guys, like if you look at like a Randy Orton or an Adam Copeland, guys of that level, if they were in the 60s, 70s, 80s, they'd be in, with their longevity and their, star power, they'd be in. But because there's so much, Moxley, 2-time wrestler of the year. I mean, everybody back in the 80s was wrestler of the year, was, in everyone in the 90s, and Moxley was still at like, what was he this year? I have this right in front of me. Moxley was 30, is it 30, 32%? Yeah, I mean, it's like, so it's just a tough category, but I think people just decided this year was the year for Sabu. And Punk and Rhodes, I think that I expected, or I thought they should be in, and enough people also did as well. So they got in. They were the top of the category just because, I mean, Cody was the top babyface during a boom period, and you look at the gates that he drew and everything. And I know, a lot of it is the company, but the fact is that Cody drew, Cody was there when the company went from not drawing that well, doing okay to doing these, stadium shows over and over and over during the year, as opposed to before when it was really the only stadium show was WrestleMania. And Punk, I mean, Punk was a big star, and he's a big needle mover, and he was a big independent star and everything like that too.
And then you had mentioned with Brian the other night that you think that with these folks going in, that next year, maybe it's a little predictable about who could go in. Who are those folks that you were talking about?
I mean, there's people who came very close. Hayabusa came close, but there's nobody in Japan that kept Hayabusa out. You know what I mean? It was just, Hayabusa's debatable. I don't think he's a slam dunk by any means, but I think he was a very innovative flyer. He was a really great flyer. JYD has gained every year. He's right on the cusp.
Is this his highest ever?
Yeah, by far. June Byers, highest ever. Jesse Ventura has been this high before. He was off the ballot because he didn't get in after 15 years, and put back on, and he didn't get in again, but he was very close. Jose Torres, who I believe will probably get in next year, especially because Arion was the strong guy in that rest of the world category. Torres was number 2 with Arion in. That makes him the strongest. So he'll, I think there's a good shot for him. Ted Turner, Ted Turner's an interesting one. Either, you've got two mentalities. Either he's a slam dunk, or he shouldn't be in, because he never really worked in wrestling, but he was, except for Vince McMahon and Hulk Hogan, probably the most influential person of the modern era when it comes to pro wrestling, the history of it and everything like that. Certainly from 1975 to 2000, I mean, Ted Turner, the Superstation cable television, all of that, his moves were really were just gigantic when it came to wrestling. And then owning WCW for all those years, which, became, very big company for a short period of time, but it was a very big company. And then after that, the Von Erichs, who, I mean, like, the Von Erichs are a weird one because they got a ton of votes. They didn't get in. I believe this was their highest year ever. I mean, Kerry's like JYD in the sense that I think Kerry and JYD should have been Hall of Famers, but they weren't. and it was their own fault or fault or whatever. I mean, JYD, it was just he had those years and then he fell off and was terrible. And, it's supposed to be about your whole career. And his whole career, was kind of a tragic career and of what not to do. And Kerry, the same thing. Kerry was the darling of wrestling, and he was one of the biggest stars, 83, 84, 85. And then, drug issues. And then he was in a motorcycle wreck that severed part of his foot in surgery later, and never the same and never the big star, and Kevin had a longer career, but Kevin, when he was young, I mean, he was dynamic. Those three guys, the brothers, were awesome, but it was really only a couple of years. And David was 25 when he passed away. So, to me, they're going to get votes, but it's like, I don't think of them. And it's funny because, I lived there during their peak, and I know, and I've told the stories a million times. It was a really unique time in wrestling. And maybe you go in there with the idea of Satoru Sayama, that they were so big for a few years that they belong in. But it's like I just don't see it as, I don't see them having the longevity. But they, and then I think the movie helped. I think the movie helped them. I think the movie helped June Byers.
What also helps? It's just in my mind, Kevin, when he still comes out today, and the people still react to him, I know it's pretty clear that they're putting him in places where the fans know him and react to him, but he still feels really, really special.
Well, the Von Erich name in Dallas is gigantic, because you got to remember that, Fritz Von Erich, I mean, that guy was on TV for decades and decades. And then he raised his kids, to be the stars. And they came they didn't even finish college. I mean, they were, David was, I think he went to college for maybe a year. Kerry went maybe a year. Kevin went a little longer. And they got in really young, and they were very green when they got in, but the people loved them as Fritz Von Erich's sons, the all-American boys, high school sports stars. I mean, they were told about them, and they, David was very tall, he was thin, although he filled out later and everything. But, David had fire. He could talk. And, the guys who were really good workers, like the Harley Races, they went to bat for David and figured, we need a new star in Texas, and David was going to be the guy. Kevin was a great athlete, probably the best athlete of all of them as far as being a pro wrestler. But, after a couple of years, I never thought that Kevin was the same after David died. I think Kevin and David started together. They were a tag team. Kerry was more of a single guy. He was the bodybuilder, Adonis, discus thrower, weightlifter guy, and, just had this look that, the women just loved. They loved all of them, but Kerry the most, really. And, in 84, man, when Kerry won the world title, that was still, to me, one of the most unbelievable wrestling scenes ever. And, but he was, Kerry's 24 years old. Had just turned 24 when he won the NWA world title from Ric Flair. And even though it was only supposed to be for a couple of weeks, and only was for a couple of weeks, that was still an amazing thing at that time. But, in 1984, Kevin's 26, 27, he's still young. I mean, if David hadn't died, I mean, who knows what would happen if David hadn't died. But David, like in 83, when they were still around before David died, and that was like the big year to me of Northern Texas wrestling, or just Texas wrestling, I guess, because they went in San Antonio as well. But, it's like you had, Terry Gordy was 23, 22, 23. Michael Hayes is 25, 24, 25. Kerry is 23. Kevin is 25, 26. and the territory was on fire, and it was just like this, unique period, and it really didn't last long, but people remember it because it was really, really big. I lived there. They were household names. It's like if you were not a wrestling fan, you knew Fritz von Erich was, and you knew the kids were, and the girls all loved him, whether they were wrestling fans or not. When David died, it was really something there. So I mean, the impact of the von Erichs was gigantic. Does that make them Hall of Famers? I don't know. I mean, there's still, a lot of debate on what is a Hall of Famer. But yeah. So those are. Then Monsoon's the only other one that was over 50% besides the ones that we mentioned.
Yeah, and the book is still very new, so it's possible that that could gain steam if Brian's book picks up as well.
Yeah.
Okay, so I guess we did have a couple questions, and one of the questions is at first I thought it's kind of a silly one, but there may be other people, if there's someone like this who says, "Hey, could you two please explain who actually votes on the Hall of Fame? How many people? Who selected them? Is there a list of the voters?"
Nah, because people in wrestling vote, and it's got to be confidential. But there were I don't know the exact number of voters, but there were I know there were 449 who voted in the U.S. and Canada modern section, and over 400 in the other one. So it's probably a little, because not everyone votes in every section, but it's probably 450 to 500 in that range. Voted. They're reporters, a lot of reporters. Boy, there's way more people who report on wrestling than before, that's for sure. And then a lot of historians, that've been around. And then, people in wrestling. I send ballots out to a lot. Many people return them, and so you get, wrestlers, you get office people, whatever, people that are in wrestling that follow it really close, or follow the history. And so that's who votes.
What do you think of the term reporter in today's day and age, though?
It's a weird term, isn't it? Well, I mean, the reporters, is because, I use that because the Baseball Hall of Fame, which this is modeled after, is all reporters.
Yeah.
Like the active talent doesn't vote. But I thought that, like, I don't want to see, active wrestlers vote. And some people don't like it because some of them don't study the history as much. But a lot, the ones that do, the ones that vote in this, they know their history for the most part. I mean, like, there's different ways to interpret the history and everything. But yeah, and the historians are not necessarily reporters. Some of them have written books, but they're not like day-to-day reporters on wrestling. But most of them are people who just like gather stuff, and they follow it as close as anybody, and probably have more historical knowledge than anybody. So I think those are really, they're really good voters. But everyone's got a different perspective. Like, I think that there's a natural thing where people favor their childhood, which is why, like, guys from the past have an easier time than guys from the present. Especially when you're older, and it's just like,
What's funny is I think I'm harder on my childhood, or on the stuff that I grew up on, just because it is like so big in my memory, and I have to take that into consideration when I do the voting. But what also, the other thing that I find interesting is there's lots of people who will not vote for folks who are currently stars because of the idea that their story has not finished yet. There still could be more positive and negative to happen, which I think is pretty interesting, because I probably, if I'm going to favor something, I probably do favor the current era, because what happens in a lot of Hall of Fames is recency is actually not great.
Right.
Because they want they want like 10 years behind to really study. And so I probably, if I have a bias, it is probably on the current performers.
Yeah. It's hard for like current performers, because I mean, I'll look at like, like guy like Ole Anderson, just an example, who he did a lot worse this year than he's done in the past. And I think he did. It's hard to say, like, did I vote for him? No. Do I think he did lower than he should have? Yes. When the very first year was 96, and like, I was like 50-50 on Ole Anderson. I mean, that's how strong I thought he was. 50-50. Yeah, maybe yes, maybe no. Like there were a couple people, I think there was 4 of them where it was just kind of like, well, I won't put them in right away, but maybe, once we do the voting, they'll probably get in or they won't, like of those guys, like Wilbur Snyder never got in, Wahoo McDaniel did, Murdoch never got in, Ole never got in, Dos Caras did get in right away. Those were the guys, my borderline guys. Some got in, some never did. Like there's people, who, look, there's people who like, big Ole fans, and I can understand that too. But like, during Ole's heyday, I mean, Ole was a fantastic heel, but like during his heyday, was there ever a year where you would have said, like, if you ranked the 10 best wrestlers of the year, that Ole would be on the list? Never. It wouldn't have been. 20, maybe there's some years, maybe not. 10, no. And I mean, then you got a guy like Moxley, who's probably been at that level, the star for years and years and years and years and years, who's at 30%, or a guy like Orton, you know what I mean? These guys, so it is, if you look at, the one thing to look at, I guess is the best way to put it, is you look at guys, if you go the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and count up the number of guys from each of those decades, and you'll see that the guys now are underrepresented, but in time they will be, because what happens is the different things happen. If you're like my general feeling is, if you're a really, really great in-ring wrestler, you better get in when you're still wrestling, because people will forget about it. If you are a legend for whatever reason, like maybe overpushed or got pushed or whatever, or got a lot of TV time, you're probably better later when people forget about like your wrestling. Maybe you're, you know what I mean? I mean, that's where Sarge got in. That's where JYD is strong. Like when JYD, years and years ago, when he was in the ballot, nobody voted for him. You know what I mean? Because they'd seen him.
Mm-hmm.
But now it's like, oh my God, we, look at those 5 years in Mid-South. And it's like, yeah, we all knew about those 5 years. It was 5 years, but now, like, he's on the borderline. Von Erich's the same thing. Kerry was on the ballot, never got big support at all. And he was a stronger candidate than JYD. And, but, he didn't, I mean, he never got strong support. Now, all of a sudden, whether it's the movie, whether it's, the Von Erich name or whatever, like the JYD name, Sergeant Slaughter name, those in time, those guys end up doing better. The more memorable, if you're more memorable, that even if it's a short period of time, or if you're just, people talk about you in history, it kind of helps your case a lot more than guys who were, Kiyoshi Tamura, who was a fantastic in-ring wrestler, but never made it, or Volkan, who didn't make it. That was a just incredible submission guy. And main evented and drew well, but it was a style that died, that ring style that was a lot of fun for its era. The fact is, once that style died, its history dies too, so
Mm-hmm.
that's one of those things too. I think a lot of the Carolinas guys do better because the Carolinas history became WCW and it lasted a lot longer, whereas other promotions, their history died when their company died. So their stars maybe don't do as well. Yeah.
Okay, last question here. It's a two-parter. It is from Darius. Now, I don't know this name, so I may butcher this name, but Darius says, can you ask Dave on Cola Quariani?
Cola Quariani, who was he was actually the most famous for being the manager of Rocca, in the 50s. He owned a piece of Rocca, but he was in Jim Londos and Cola Quariani had the biggest crowd in Europe until, who's to say, right? It's like, how do you measure a crowd? I mean, the newsreel looks like there's a zillion people there. I've seen the look at the stadium, the stadium in Greece where they had the match. I'd always heard it was 80,000. Some people said 110. I think the stadium really held 60, but then they had this overhang where 20,000 people were outside the stadium, according to the newspaper reports that were probably somewhat accurate. that were watching that weren't ticket holders. But you know, the Jim Londos Colo Coriani match was the biggest match by far ever in Europe, in Athens, Greece, in 34-ish, whatever year that was. Yeah. So, what about him?
He was just wondering what he would as far as Hall of Fame.
No one's ever brought him up to me for Hall of Fame, you know, and he wouldn't be someone you would vote on. He would be someone that you would
A
put in.
historian.
Yeah, the historians. And, you know, I mean, there's a lot of historians talk to me about the one that they talk most about is Dick Sheekat right now. You know, it's a kind of one of those things where he was a really big star. He was the last big star of that era that's not in, but at the same time, you know, he double crossed Dan O'Mahony and in the match and stole the championship from him. And that really, you know, not that specifically, but it really hurt Dan O'Mahony as a draw, and he was like the biggest draw in wrestling at the time. And then, you know, then they had the court case where, you know, it basically exposed that wrestling wasn't real. So a lot of sports pages stopped covering wrestling, and, you know, wrestling hit the skids. You know, I mean, wrestling was really big, you know, until, you know, that happened. They were having, you know, wrestling was going through a real nice period. And then, man, you know, in the late 30s, it was just dying. Early 40s was dying, right? It was like people weren't into the wrestlers. They were into the freaks. They didn't take the world title seriously. And it really didn't, you know, I mean, you know, Bill Longson drew in the 40s and everything, but wrestling didn't really come back until, you know, in a big way until television. So that's, you know, with Gorgeous George in 47, 48, 49. So, you know, a lot of people, you know, and rightfully so, you know, that will go like, put him in the Hall of Fame. He did more harm than good to the business, you know, even though he was a star prior to that and, you know, like a world title level guy. So, but that's the name that, when it comes to historians, it's very debatable. I mean, some are so adamant not to put him in, and others think that it's, you know, he needs to go in, and it's kind of like, it's not going to be a voting thing. So it's kind of like, I don't know. I'm erring on the side of caution right now. So we'll see what happens in the future.
And then before we let you get on to finishing publishing the Observer and packing and all that stuff, one more question from Darius, which was, with 30 years of the NWO in 2026, would you consider putting Hogan, Nash, and Hall on the ballot as a trio?
Nash and Hall are already on the ballot, and you know, Hogan's in. So I think that Nash and Hall represents that. They're on the ballot. They did not get, you know, I mean, they're not close. I mean, let me see where Hall and Nash got. Do you have the numbers in front of you?
Hall and Nash.
I got them right in front of me. It's 20.7%, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They were below the tag teams like the Hardys and the Steiners.
Yeah. Steiners do well in this, but not well enough to go in, you know. It's interesting. You know, I thought Bob Ellis was up. You know, I mean, Bob Ellis did not die this year. He died many years ago, but we all found out this year, and then that's when I kind of wrote about him. And he got a bump, but I actually thought he would do better. A lot of people kind of like were looking at his career because you know, Bob Ellis was like for you know, a period, he was a very big draw, but he also had a lot of longevity. You know, he's a big draw from 59 to 65 all over, you know. I mean, San Francisco and New York and St. Louis. And I mean, he was like a legendary figure, you know, everywhere, you know, the big cowboy star. He was, did some TV roles because of his fame in wrestling, when he was in Los Angeles. But, you know, I mean, he was a main event guy who, and then he still, you know, he worked with some smaller territories and things like that, but, you know, he still was a star through the mid 70s, although by that point he was broken down. There's a lot of Tommy Rich in him, you know, in that he was the ladies' delight, the guy who drew the women, but, you know, those guys, he drew the women by bleeding a lot, and then he got older and he got balder and lost his hair and had all the scars. So he wasn't as popular to women, but he was still Cowboy Bob Ellis, so he was kind of still a star. But and he was much bigger than Tommy Rich was. But that, I mean, people who remember Tommy Rich from, and Tommy Rich's heyday was over 40 years ago too. But some people will remember the darling of the Superstation. He's another one, like Tommy Rich, for a couple of years there, was a big enough deal that he could have been, right? But didn't have longevity. But Ellis did. I thought Ellis would do a little bit better than he did. But, again, I don't know that he's a must. I think Morris Siegel's probably a must. He did in the 48 range, which
I was a little bit surprised with that one.
Yeah, a lot of people were really pushing him, and he did basically the same as last year. One of the things with him, he's in that weird thing where, Morris Siegel died in 66, I believe. And his promotional career was 29 to 66, which is a lot of years. And Texas was a pretty big territory, and he probably, I mean, I would say, he was one of the bigger promoters of his time. So he probably belongs. I mean, like when I'm looking at guys here who, Ted Turner, it's like, he's an interesting one.
Zack Sabre Jr. have the biggest jump out of anybody?
I believe so. Well, Sabu technically, because he was even on the ballot last year, but
that's right.
Zach had a big jump. Who else? And well, Jesse too wasn't on the ballot last year, but Jesse finished in the same range that he usually does. But yeah, I would vote for Zack Sabre. I think that there's just kind of like one of those things where is it ready? And it's kind of like, he's 38 years old now. He's not young. He's been great for years and years. Best technical wrestler so many times, and just an absolute marvel to watch, and one of the top guys in the ring, bell to bell, that there is, maybe that I've ever seen.
And what's most interesting to me about Zach is he came up through that same indie time frame as all these other guys, and you had all those folks go to AEW, and he stayed in New Japan, and still, it's almost like that's kind of a positive for his. He was able to become a star in Japan when this U.S. company was making big stars out of folks who he was peers with.
I think that Zach was a guy who wanted. I don't know. I think that he just, he lives in Japan. So I think he just kind of fell in love with Japan. That was the first place where he kind of made money, and New Japan took him. He was with Noah for years, and then New Japan took him and they gave him a chance. And I think that, he's like the top foreigner, and maybe he just likes his position. I mean, he'll do states, and he could do AEW when need be. But yeah, I think, from a career standpoint, it's weird because it's like when I think back on Japan and like historically, and again, like with the Bobby Bruns story, and also this week, I was actually proofreading a book that's being written on Ricky Dozan, and
who's writing it?
Irv Mushnick.
Oh wow.
So, yeah. It's a pretty interesting book. I mean, it's a lot of stuff that I know, but there's also a lot of details that that of certain things that I don't know, cultural wise, although I kind of knew them too. But so it's kind of like, between the Ricky Dozan starting Japan, and then you go into the 60s and especially like the 70s and the 80s, where Japan was it. That was the place where when I went to Japan in the 80s, it was like that was the best place. You had your best wrestlers were there, the best matches were there. I mean, just they were way ahead of everything else. And then, even in the 90s, they had lots of the best wrestling. And then in the 2000s, it just went down, although they still had a lot of good matches, but it really went down. And then you had that period, the New Japan real heyday with, Kenny Omega and Tanahashi and Okada and Kota Ibushi and all this one, Ishii, those G1s where it was just through the roof. And Zach was, just for really coming up through that period where, that's where, Japan seemed more important, and now it's back to where, there's good matches there, but it doesn't, it like, to me right now, because of the crowds and everything, Mexico feels more important than Japan. So there's a lot there. I like that I could do this year, like write about Dixon in Mexico, because Mexico history we haven't written about a lot. And, it kind of enabled me to kind of go back and that, like, 50s and 60s when Dixon was at his heyday, in Mexico, where it's, kind of like now, that history, I mean, because CMLL, is a very historically based company, more than most, that remembers its history, because it's the same family, that started promoting in 33 that's still promoting now. And it's funny, because, like, Salvador Luderoth III, who's the promoter now, I mean, it's when he first took over again, like, it was really controversial because Paco Alonso died, and Sofia Alonso, his daughter, took over, and she just wanted to change everything, and she had all these ideas. And the old guard came in, and it was like, number one, it's a woman. They basically got rid of her, and it was like they brought, um, Chavo Luderoth, Salvador III, back, and he wasn't, um, like the reason he wasn't in charge before was because he wasn't really that big of a fan of it. You know what I mean? So Paco, his cousin, kind of took over, and and died suddenly. And then now under Salvador, where you would think it's old and the old ideas and everything, and now, for whatever reason, I mean, tourists and just the right talent mix and everything, they just got hot again. And so now they're like a really hot company, I don't know. So yeah, the Toyota and Yamada were down. They're awesome. Gordienko, I know people, when we do our Hall of Fame shows, people pushed him. He's still in the Gordienko was about 37% range, Otto Vance had a big jump for whatever reason this year. A lot of people in wrestling, he did very well. I think that maybe with wrestlers that have heard the European stories, that it's like kind of a legendary name, and maybe just people in wrestling. I think he does very well with more than with reporters and everything.
All right. Well, one thing I will enjoy is that I do not have to speed read the Observer this week because of putting a show together with you. I can read it like the old days, where maybe even take me a couple days to get through the whole issue, especially with all of
This is a
the
big issue.
historical bios and such. So
Yeah,
I'll get to enjoy it.
Yeah.
All right. So,
The Paoli bio was really interesting, I mean, because France is another one of those places where, history wise, not a whole lot has been written in English and in the United States about France's history. But, France had wrestling that was like ahead of its time. If you look at some of the old clips, because there's stuff from the late 50s and 60s that have survived, where they're doing a lot of the stuff that the guys today do. But also, just the formation where Paoli was, he was the guy who, kind of like Salvador Luderoth, not like there was never wrestling there before, but he was the first one to put it, on a big stage in a 20,000 seat or 19,000 seat, arena, and, and make, these stars from France into these big stars, and then bring in the Americans. So it was like really major league wrestling that there'd never been. And then, of course, by being successful, you have many people who come in later, and promotional wars and things like that. And then stars start jumping, and it's an interesting, because it's just like reading about the United States. You have government situations, it's controversial on television. There's different, just different, things that were going on. And, it's a really fascinating story. And just the other thing with Paoli that I thought is so, is like, of all of the people in wrestling, I always, where that name really was interesting to me was when Russ Francis died, it's kind of like, I wonder who like the best athletes ever in wrestling were, like real, not like a Ricochet or a Will Ospreay who do incredible things in the ring, but guys who were like real stars in sports, like Russ Francis, who was, good in many sports and in the superstars, which was really a test of athleticism. And he was, one of the best in the world at that. And when he was a football player and a pro wrestler for that matter, and then, thinking back to like Doug Dinney in the 1800s and Raul Paoli with all the Olympics, different events he participated in the Olympics, and Leo Nomalini, who was, just one of the most underrated athletes there ever was, like legendary football player. But I mean, this guy was like, like super, like he didn't even play high school football. Like he was just some big kid in I think Chicago, whose parents didn't want him playing sports, so he played no sports. And he goes into the military, and he's just this big guy who's like fast. And like, Vern Gagne was one of the guys who was with him in the military base, and they basically teach him how to be a football player when he's in his 20s. And he's so good that after, being on the, the Marines, whatever it is, with the service team, Vern goes back to the University of Minnesota and says, we got this unbelievable guy. Comes in, he's a college football Hall of Famer, goes into the NFL. He starts in the NFL at 26. You know what I mean? Because that's when he graduated college and everything because of the war. And, he's for like 14 years till he's 40. He's like, the best lineman in all of football. He's wrestling in the off season, but he was like his strength was incredible. And he was a sprinter at 260, and he was a shot putter, and he was a discus thrower. It was, and he was, like at the University of Minnesota, when Vern was, Vern wrestled heavyweight, but then in the Olympic year, I believe it was, Vern wanted to go back to 191 because he had a better shot at the Olympics at 191 than at 220 at heavyweight. So University of Minnesota needed a heavyweight, and Vern and the other guys, because they were football player wrestlers, go like, Leo, come out for wrestling. And this guy had never done wrestling, and they taught him basic wrestling. He took second in the Big Ten. He didn't go to the tournament because he was too valuable. He was too valuable as a track star, because he was on the 100, the 440 relay, shot, discus, probably something else that I don't even know, maybe hammer or something. But he's like, superstar in the track team, and track in that era was far more popular than it is now, and far more popular than wrestling. So you would have guys, and Bill Miller was another one who, they probably would have placed in the NCAAs, but they didn't even go to the tournament because it's track season and that's priority. So, but I'm always fascinated by, like those type of guys that were just all around incredible athletes that went into pro wrestling.
All right, let's toss it to our interview with Raven on his new documentary that hits Amazon Prime next week. I want to welcome our special guest, Raven, who has a documentary coming out on November 18th on Amazon Prime, which is really cool, called Nevermore, The Raven Effect. How you doing?
Good. Terrible lighting. I can't get my lighting this shit right, but there we go.
No, you're fine. Do you want to kick it off, Dave?
Well, I mean, I just watched a documentary a couple days ago, and there's so many different things to talk about. I mean, it really goes heavily into ECW, but also your life before ECW. A lot of things, that people don't know about your, childhood stuff and the effects of professional wrestling after the glory days are over. And, one of the things that, if you have things that you look back on when it comes to wrestling, are there regrets or lessons that you might want to give younger wrestlers, going through your experience on things to avoid or things to do more or things to learn? I mean,
so many regrets. Anybody who says they don't have regrets is full of shit. I got millions of regrets. There's things I'm happy where I'm at. Don't get me wrong. I'm very content with my life, as content as I've ever been. but that doesn't mean I wouldn't have changed things along the way. And one of the things I would have is I would have found a way to get over my insecurity much sooner, because my insecurity led to my egotism. Anybody who's egotistical is just insecure. I mean, that's scientific fact, you know, and you know, but I convinced myself that I wasn't, you know, insecure, you know, which is ridiculous. But you know, I would have went to a psychiatrist earlier or a psychologist earlier, probably, if I had to go back and tell myself. I think everybody should spend time on a couch. Frankly, it's you know, it's very liberating to talk to a therapist and to be able to bare your soul and to you know, to offer up all your inner demons, and look for a way to get around them, you know, instead of just suffering with them.
When you talk about demons and everything like that, you know, obviously you went through in meeting wrestlers and being around wrestling, you know, especially in the era that you were in, there were a lot of tragedies. And what do you think? I mean, as far as like, do you think there's anything other than perhaps luck that or things that you figured out early enough that you avoided being one of those tragedies, because you were around a lot of people who ended up being those tragedies?
I was too stupid to die. No, I don't know. I was a smart addict, though. I always had a surplus of pills, so I would never run out and go through withdrawals, which is a nightmare. Which is not advocating to you know, which isn't something I'd recommend to anybody else. You know, I don't know how anybody could be a drug addict in this day and age, with the supply scarcity, you know, and the hard, you know, it used to be so easy to get, you know, opiates, and because we abused it, then now people can't. You know, it's much harder for people today to be addicts, I guess. But that's not what you're looking for. I think I was stupid, like full of enough bravado that I felt I was above, you know, dying in that stupid a death, you know, and I never really, and I stayed at an even keel. My dose was really high on drugs, but I stayed at the same level, so it wasn't like I was going crazy, you know, until the ecstasy, that got real crazy. But for the most part, I stayed at an even keel, at the same level. So my body was used to it, you know, as opposed to when Sandman overdoses because he hadn't shot up an Oxycontin before, you know. He wanted to shoot up the heavy dose and he OD'd, which is in the movie. Well, not him ODing, that's not in the movie, but the story of him ODing is.
Yeah.
One of the more powerful moments in the movie, I thought, was when you talked about your dad a little bit, and how as a grown-up, still a young man, but a grown-up, you had this realization that you wanted to write him a letter, and in that letter you were mending fences or something because maybe you'd gotten into an argument, and you know, you told him that you loved him, but there was also this thing out there where he had never said that to you, and that kind of lingered. And I think, at least as far as I remember in the movie, he didn't say it. Like, he acknowledged the letter, but he didn't say it. And you know, one of the things about this movie, I mean, you're dealing with lots of different things. Like it talks about, you know, your entire life, and that relationship between father and son, you know, it is such a powerful one. And when I watched that, I kind of came out of it like, wow, like that relationship between father and son connects, like Field of Dreams, like that movie Field of Dreams, like that is the theme to that movie. That is such a powerful theme. And it seemed, you know, obviously there's a little bit of a discomfort in mentioning that story, but is there anything out of that story that you took, being able to say that in the movie and, you know, be public with that feeling?
Yeah, I think the overall thing I want to pass on, I think, from it is that mental illness is not something that should be shoved away into a corner. You know, if you have a broken arm, you get a cast put on it. If you have a broken brain, you know, then you need to get medication for it, or you need to do therapy, you know, to fix it. You don't do, you know, if you injure yourself, you're still going to get physical therapy. You're not just going to let it heal on its own, or if you are, it's not going to heal the right way. And the same thing with psychological damage. Psychological damage is so much worse than physical damage, and it goes with, as part of my wrestling psychology too, is that, you know, like I can punch somebody in the face and it's gonna hurt, but if I steal their girlfriend, it's gonna, you know, they're gonna be shut down for months, you know. And I tried to always use that in wrestling as that same sense of psychology of the pain. And that's why a lot of my promos were cathartic to me. And then the father thing, my dad, yeah, he wrote me a letter back saying that he loved me, but I think he might have said it once or twice after that. Yeah, we were never close, but I always admired him. I really admired him. I always wanted to be funny like him. And I didn't used to be funny as a kid, and I tried so hard to be funny. And there's nothing worse than somebody who's unfunny. But but because of it, I taught myself to be funny, and eventually became one of the funnier guys that, you know, in the locker room. But it also, his sense of humor was all Don Rickles style. And so what it did was, the target of its insults were always me. I knew he didn't mean it, but because he didn't say I love you, and because of all the humor directed at me, I thought it was funny, and I thought I was smart enough to know that he doesn't mean it, but it still destroyed my sense of self-worth, you know, and which led me to be egotistical, which led me to the narcissistic personality disorder, and it led me to always trying to be the smartest guy in the room. And not only did I have to be the smartest guy in the room, even if I wasn't, I had to make sure everybody knew that, which is completely annoying. You know, nobody wants to hear somebody telling everybody how much smarter he is than them. But that's the only way I knew, you know, until I got therapy.
When you go through, you know, your wrestling career took a lot of different twists and turns, and obviously the most famous is the Raven character. And, you know, you really did a total, I don't know, 180 or whatever you would call it. I mean, you started with this Scotty the Body, you know, I mean, in different territories, but Oregon was probably your first full-time territory. And then you ended up in WWE, where, now, what was it like in the sense of, you were really good as far as a wrestler and entertainer from the first time I saw you, which would probably be the Oregon territory. And then you went to WWE, and at the time, you know, basically, and you could kind of correct me on this, I got the sense that they just figured you're too small, but you're really smart, so we're going to make you a producer, which was a good job, but not the job you wanted at all.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. So now, what was it like in the sense of, I mean, you weren't a small guy, you know, you were a bodybuilder type guy, but they wanted like a monster sized guys.
Yeah, they wanted 280. Yeah, I was 220, and I was the smallest guy on a national stage other than the 1-2-3 Kid, who was designed his gimmick was that he was the smallest guy, you know. And everybody else was 280. Even the guys who were 5'9" were 280. You know, I just couldn't carry that kind of weight back then.
That wouldn't have been good for you if you did. So now you were there.
But I would have done it. Though. That's the thing. I was taking steroids way before I got into the wrestling business because I wanted to look like a bodybuilder, you know, which I didn't have the genetics for it. But, you know, I got the Jewish genetics, which are great for brain power, but not so good for physical appearance.
So you're there in WWE and have a good job, and you chucked it essentially because you wanted to be a performer. How did you come up with the Raven idea when you came to ECW with Paul Heyman?
I came up with it. I was talking with DDP one day, who's been very helpful in my career and a very close friend of mine for all these years. And we were talking, and he's like, you got to stop being a chicken shit heel. And I go, but I like being a chicken shit heel. It gets heat. It's, it's there's nuance, there's character development. It makes it much more interesting. And he goes, yeah, but nobody's buying it. All the main bookers who were, I forget who was booking WCW at the time, and
was it maybe Watts?
No, Watts was already fired.
We're talking later, right.
Yeah.
It'll be probably Kevin Sullivan, yeah.
Yeah, and and Kevin Sullivan was a small guy, but he always played a tough guy. Paige goes, "You got to be a tough guy." I go, "But I don't want to." I go, "There's no subtlety and nuance." He goes, "Yeah, but if you want a job, you're working for a company. That's what you got to do." And I go, "All right, I'll be a tough guy." I mean, it's not that I was afraid of portraying one. I was a U.S. Marine. I've held my own in the numerous bouncing jobs before I got into wrestling. It's just everybody's a tough guy. And in the world of tough guys, I didn't feel like my toughness qualified. With guys like Steiner and Haku. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, but I go, I guess I'll be a tough guy then. And Paige goes, so that was when he pointed me in that direction. And he goes, because I wore a leather jacket all the time. I wore Doc Martens. I wore ripped up jeans and T-shirts. And I wore basically Raven wear, the WWF and WWE when I was working. And in fact, part of the project, I was made the HR ladies project to get me into a suit and tie. Work in the office when I was working in the office as associate producer. And Paige goes, "You look like those Red Hot Chili Pepper dudes in the movie Point Break." And he goes, "You ought to do something like that." And I was like, and he gave me the idea, and then I figured it out, put it all together. And then one day I was just sitting there, and I go, I need a name for this character. Let's see. I thought of The Crow, the movie The Crow. I thought that's a good reference point. His name's Eric Draven, Raven. Quote the Raven nevermore. Boom, I got a name and a catchphrase in 30 seconds. Like that required no work. I was like, this is awesome. And then I put together an outfit. And originally I tried on a flannel T-shirt with the sleeves cut off, but I looked like Big Josh. And so I was like, that's not the way. I got a tie of flannel around my waist, put on a concert tee. And I know it's important to have different ring jackets, because you want to have a variety, because to be a star, you got to look like a star. And so you want to have a multitude of ring jackets, because then it makes you look like you're richer and more well-to-do and more style. It makes you look more like a star. But I knew I couldn't. Raven would never change his leather jacket because that's not his style. He wouldn't care to. He just wears ripped-up jacket. So that's why I went with the concert tees, because that way I could have a different T-shirt every week, so that would carry the same purpose. I always told people to be a star, you got to look like a star. And to me, I had to find a way to make it to look like a star by not looking like a star. If that makes sense.
Well, it's the distinctive thing, because it's funny, because I have talked to people and I go like, one of the keys to being a star to the people is to look like a star, and that doesn't mean Ric Flair, although Ric Flair looked like a star, but it means being distinctive. Like when guys dress up nicely, but they look like everybody else, that's not a star. You're just one of everybody else.
Right, correct.
And then people go like, oh, you want people to look like a star, but you say John Cena or Steve Austin. I go, because they look like stars, because they're distinctive. They're not dressed like everybody else. It's their character. If the key is the character, it's not like expensive clothes. It's the character, right?
Right, but you have to, in most cases, if you have one ring jacket, like I always used to say this, use this as as an example. Ric Flair had a dozen ring jackets, right, or at least a dozen. Terry Taylor had one ring jacket that was really, really nice, same kind of style, but he wore it one week and then he wore it the next week, and then by the third week you're like, I've already seen it. Yep. It loses its star power to it. You know what I mean? For an example.
Mm. Now, when you did you have any trouble selling it to Paul Heyman, the character, or did he go for it immediately?
I actually had DDP call him because they're good friends. DDP helped me with that too. and he called him up and talked to him and sold him on the idea. But Paul thought it was going to be like just a grunge version of Johnny Polo. Like he thought it was going to be a chicken shit heel comedy character. And when I came up to do my first promo at the studio, he saw it and he got the character more than I got the character in the beginning. Like he understood exactly what I was going for, but I wasn't even sure what I was going for. I mean, I knew what I was going for, but I didn't realize how deep I was going to take it. You know what I mean? Does that make sense?
Yeah. So now you created and the documentary goes through this. You created the storyline with the summer camp and everything with Tommy Dreamer being your best friend who, when you were like young and kind of like that backstory.
Well, I wanted a backstory because originally I was just going to go there for 3 months and then I was hopefully going to Smoky Mountain. So I wanted to have a backstory so we'd have a hot introduction so we could just get this feud right off the ground. And that's why I came up with the idea. And Beulah even wasn't in the very beginning. She came along a little bit later. But yeah, the summer camp thing I came up with and I sold Paul on it because I was like, this is going to make it so much more interesting, because it's psychological pain. Once again, it's not physical pain, even though I would physically beat him up, it's the psychological damage I did to him that would, and the fact he could never beat me, even though ironically, he actually beat me in the very first match we had together before. And I forget where that was, Jim Thorpe or somewhere. He actually beat me in the first match we had.
So now, when it comes to like the one thing when I'm watching the documentary now in 2025 and I'm watching those ECW clips and everything like that, it's like it's so different of a product. And I mean, it was different of a product than
it's visceral. It's visceral.
Yeah, it was different from the other companies even then. And your character was more different than most of the characters. Like your character was really something unique, and it really, like watching it now, really stood out. I mean, as far as just something, like it kind of exposed to me modern storylines because there's nothing like this one. And this one, it had so much more legs than, hey, let's do like a 3-match program. You win one, I win the third, and then we whatever in the third one, right? Or we do a DQ and we come back and it's over, right? We've seen the match, we've seen it 3 times. We don't need to see it again. And so many times, like in wrestling today, someone will have a match, and it's even a great match, and then they book it for a rematch, and people will go like, I already seen it, can't you do it again? And you did your thing for years, and
nobody got sick of it.
I don't remember. Yeah, no, I never remember thinking like, oh, this has run its course, because you made sure it didn't run its course.
Yeah, that's the art form. That's what wrestling is. When it's done right, that to me is pro wrestling. Like I grew up in WWF until I was like 9 or 10, and I'm glad I ended up moving to Florida because we got Florida Championship Wrestling, which was more storyline driven. It wasn't just like you said, the 3-4 week program with Bruno, or I come in and interfere in your match, and now we're having a feud for 3 weeks. It's so much more than that, and that's where I got that from, I think. I must have been where I got it from. And I just always believed in storytelling, because like I said, psychological pain is much worse than the physical pain.
Did you have any favorite angles like in Florida when you were a kid that like kind of resonated with you?
I actually liked when they took Billy Graham out into the desert and they staked him to the ground, and Billy Graham said he withstood the vipers and the scorpions for 7 days as he laid out there. And he hates that period of his career. Billy does. Because I told him about it. I said, I love that. I want him to sign that picture I had of it that I found in Florida at the office when I was there, when I was in Florida Championship Wrestling. I saw a picture of it, and I told him I would love to have him sign it. He's like, I don't want to sign that. He goes, I'll give you a new picture. I'm like, I don't want a new one. I just wanted that one because I had fond memories of it.
So now, like, you go through, you go to WCW from ECW, and the story that you told, and I mean, I remember the way when it went down with that meeting and everything. There's a meeting, and essentially Eric goes, anyone who's unhappy, you can quit. And you said basically, okay, I want to quit.
Yeah, it was actually more exacting. It was because Raven, if you're unhappy with the company, there's the door. He actually didn't address to everybody; he just addressed me.
Mm-hmm.
And but here's the thing: is I was wrong for speaking to the newspapers about how miserable I was. And the irony was I wasn't even close to being as miserable as I'd get in the WWE.
Yeah.
Now
later when you were in WWE, the one thing that I remember, because I know you talked in the movie essentially about how, it was, you really thought you could go there and do something, and it didn't happen. They kind of had you at a certain
broke
level.
Me.
Yeah, and you weren't going to, they had decided no matter what you did. The thing that I remember, and it was about you and Taz and Dreamer to an extent too, is you would be over because of the following that ECW had, and you were stars in ECW. And it was, I almost felt during that period that they had decided that ECW is beneath us. But if you're a star because of ECW, it doesn't count, even if our fans react to you. And it was almost like you were in a no-win situation. Like if you got over, they said, well, you got over in a way that doesn't count. And if you didn't get over, it'd be like, look, our fans don't watch ECW. It doesn't matter. So
it also didn't help that I had left on such, that Vince and them, I'd left with heat from the last time when I was Johnny Polo, that I left with heat. That didn't help matters any either. And that was a lot of my fault.
Yeah. I mean, when you look back, do you think that you could have been, I don't know what the word is, but more conciliatory when you would leave companies or anything like that, or just
it wasn't that I did anything wrong. I mean, it was more. It wasn't that I left on bad terms. It was A, that I left. B, that I had Shane out till 4 a.m. every night.
Yeah.
Which everybody thought, oh, you're kissing his ass trying to get over. And I'm like, no, this is burying me. But I was too busy worrying about my partying instead of my career, because I wasn't having much of a career. I was working in the office and I was Johnny Polo,
Yeah.
Do you still have any contact with Shane over the years?
No, it was surprising when I came back, he really had no time for me.
Really?
Yeah, I really was surprised by that.
Maybe he got warned by his dad before they brought you back.
Yeah, maybe. That makes a lot of sense, though. Yeah. I didn't think about that.
I actually wanted to quickly go back to the ECW stuff, because some of this documentary is really and I'm relating it to a director's commentary. Like if you buy a DVD of a movie, sometimes they'll have a director and maybe an actor speak about the scenes as they're ongoing. And when you were talking about the angles, it would have you and Dreamer, and then and there's some stuff with the Sandman, and you guys aren't doing a director's commentary, but there would be a scene, and then you would kind of describe the clip and what was behind it and what was in the storytelling. And I thought that was really cool, and I think big fans of ECW will really enjoy that stuff. But the question is really, so you worked two different stints in, WWF and then WWE, also WCW. But I imagine I
couldn't hold down a job. I worked there. That's the thing, is I kept looking for. It's part of my nature that I had FOMO, fear of missing out. I was always trying to go up one more level. Get to, this will get me content. This will get me content.
But my guess is that more so than anything WWF or WCW related, all anyone wants to talk to you about is ECW, probably, is my guess. And if I'm wrong, then I'm wrong. But that was such a big part of your career, but the smallest of all the companies nationally. But I'm guessing that's what people want to talk to you about when they see you on the streets.
I haven't been like a regular I haven't got that kind of recognition in a number of years. Every month and every week, every day, every month, every year, you're off TV. Your value to your star power drops, and your ability to be recognized, which is to me is great. I prefer not to be recognized. You know what I mean? I don't need that adulation. Even though that's part of the reason I got into business, because I wanted the adulation of perfect strangers. Even though I knew that wasn't a fix, subconsciously I knew it wasn't a fix. I still wanted it, And but no, people talk about all kinds of stuff. You would think that they would talk more about ECW, but I get all kinds of weird questions. Like I don't usually get recognized other than. Yeah, when somebody does, they're just like, thanks for, it's more, I guess because of my age, it's more thanks for what you did. Thanks for making my childhood, or thanks for, whatever. But, yeah, I guess, I don't know. It's been so long since it's been like, on the top of my head, where I'm getting recognized everywhere I go, that it just doesn't. I don't really recall which would be more. I would imagine, it seems like ECW should be more, but then I got a lot of recognition. I had a lot of. It's funny. I thought my WWE run was horrible, but it really wasn't. Looking back on it, I won the hardcore belt like 39 times, But those matches stuck with people, And the reason it's like. I know people consider it garbage wrestling, but I don't think it was garbage wrestling the way I did it, because I had psychology. You told a story with it. Babyface gets a shine, heel gets heat, babyface makes a comeback. It wasn't just I hit you, you hit me, bump, 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 bump.
What, as far as like, one of the things that's really graphic in the movie is the price that you and so many of the other wrestlers in ECW paid, as far as, between the effects of the partying and the injury of the body toll,
and the unprotected chair shots.
The unprotected chair shots, yeah. Now when you look back, do you believe the unprotected chair shots did a number on you?
Yeah, I think it did some damage. I definitely got some brain damage. So did all the drugs I took. I think Sabu was the smartest. The way he threw the chair, you can still get a chair shot without the smartest. One of my favorite things anybody's ever done in wrestling was the way Sabu would throw the chair at you. So you get the big rattle, because it makes a big noise when it bounces off your hands, hitting it with your, and it hits your head and your hands. But it doesn't hurt and it doesn't cause any damage, I don't think, because it's not throwing it that hard. You couldn't throw a chair that way hard enough. You know what I'm talking about, right?
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, taking the chair shots the way we took them was just ridiculous,
Yeah.
Yeah,
some of them are scary as hell. If you look back and you look at them now, like just absolutely, like it makes you cringe. Some of them, yeah.
Yeah, it really does.
And it was kind of a macho thing then, in the sense of, like now. Not now, but there's ways to protect yourself. But the key in the ECW days is that you didn't protect yourself.
Well, there's an art form to taking a chair shot. The art form is, as he's hitting you, you're bumping. So that if you time it perfectly, then as the chair is hitting your head, making the noise, you're on your way down to take the bump. And so you never get hit. You don't get clobbered with it as much as you still get clobbered with it, but it's not as bad by any stretch of the imagination. And there's an art form to taking a chair shot, but the people don't know it, which is, it's probably better that they just don't use them. Or I guess, I don't know if they do use them. I don't watch wrestling anymore. I stopped watching during the Alliance Angle when they did that Alliance Angle and they buried everybody except RVD.
Oh yeah. So that's over 2 decades.
Yeah. And that's when I stopped watching. I got disenchanted and I just didn't have it in me to, plus, I'm also a completist. I have to watch everything, because I have to know all the stories. And it's just too much wrestling. I couldn't watch that much. And I've already seen and done anything. I'm sure there's stuff out there that I haven't seen yet or I haven't done yet. But for the most part, I don't think there is, you know? I mean, we ran the gamut.
One of the things, like, how valuable was it to your career to do, a territory like Oregon, where you're out there, 5-6 nights a week, playing in front of the same fans each week, where you can't just do a routine and do the same thing night after night after night, which in WWE and probably in so many companies, you're performing maybe once a year in front of the people live. You're on TV a lot, but the point, you can't just do the same exact, like WWE, when the guys would come here during that same period, they would come here maybe once every other month, and they would do the same exact match that they did the night before. For like 2-3 weeks, you're doing the exact same match.
Sure.
Similar time. You know what I mean? It's the same match. Whereas when you work a territory where you're in front of the people once a week, you have to, first of all, you have to advance storylines and all that to keep it interesting, but also just the idea that you have to be more versatile, I think.
Absolutely. I think it's a great learning place. It's why so many people went there. It was a territory for people that were either coming up or going back, or the end of their career after they've been a star and on the way down. And I have to give so much credit to the grappler. Lynn Denton was such a smart wrestler, such a smart guy to the business. And he really, he wouldn't teach me as in, I'll give you a lesson, kid. He would make me ask the questions and find out my own, and I would have to go find my own answers. Like one day I said I wanted to be in a cage match. He goes, all right, great. He goes, what are you going to do the week after? I go, I don't know. He goes, I'll figure it out. So I figure it out. I talk to him the next day or the next couple of days, and I go, yeah, this is where I have a cage match, and then I can do this afterwards. He goes, what are you going to do before the cage match? I go, I don't know. He goes, figure it out. And he would teach me that way and force me to learn on my own. And I learned so much from him, more than any other wrestler in my career. And he doesn't get the credit he deserves. And so I just want to put that over and his book's really, really good too.
It was a good book. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a really good book. So it's just a natural storyteller.
Yeah. Well, what made you do this? Because one of the things when I watched the documentary, so many documentaries, most documentaries, when I watch wrestling documentaries, my reaction probably would be yours too, is there's some truth here, but this is so full of shit. You know what I mean? And with yours, it was like, I think you went out of your way to be overly honest, almost like it was a catharsis. Was that, is that right?
Yeah, I told her that when Jordy Day, the director, emailed me, and then we started talking on the phone, and he said he wanted to make a documentary about me. And the reason he wanted to, in case you're going to ask that question next, is he heard me on Steve Austin's podcast and thought I sounded interesting. I thought I'd make a good documentary subject. And he said it was because of how I saw wrestling as an art form, not just as a sport, but as an art form, which I do. And but yeah, so I just lost my train of thought. What's the question again?
It was about the making of the documentary.
Right. Yeah, I told him, I said, I want it to be warts and all. I said, I don't want this to be a rah-rah piece, because, I wanted to write a book, but I was just too lazy, and I didn't want to have somebody else write my book, because you still have, if I wanted the book to be what I wanted it to be, I would have to reread it and edit it and keep rereading it and letting him edit it. And in other words, just do it myself, which is what I planned to do. But I just got too lazy, and this came along. I was like, this is perfect. It's not like I'm doing a reality show where people are coming into my home, other than for, once or twice for quick, to film stuff, as opposed to, I'm not exposing my daily life to the cameras, but I am exposing my past, which is what I wanted to do, because I feel like it could be inspirational to other people with mental illness. I feel like I wanted it to help explain myself and me to my friends and family and my fans, more. I wanted them to understand me better, because I'm a polarizing figure. We've gone back and forth before, so I know that. It's my nature. But I wanted it to, this was just a perfect opportunity, because he agreed with me that he wanted it to be that as well, so it all worked out.
You know, from what I understand, and this is from I think you were on Ariel Helwani's show, you've really gotten into MMA. Is that right?
Yeah, huge.
Yeah. What is there a reason for that? I mean, I remember when we used to talk, and this is when MMA was in its infancy, and you had told me you wanted to be an MMA announcer at the time.
Yeah, I did, but it never got an opportunity. And you know, what are you going to do? You know, I think MMA is so fascinating. I really think that people, like, if somebody would want to be managed by me, I would help them. I think I could help get them over, no matter what their record is. Even if their record is a crappy record, I guarantee I could get them over, because I just teach them pro wrestling techniques. You know what I mean? And that's the only thing it's missing. Although it's also what keeps it separate. So you don't want a whole lot of that. But if somebody chose to be a heel and understood it, like Colby Covington was a great heel, but unfortunately he took it too far.
He just tried to shock you. I don't think he really
Right.
understood it.
Yeah, that's what I'm getting at. He didn't understand it, and he felt like, you know, being a heel, you got to go push it. But you can only push so far before it's turned to heat. If you get the wrong kind of heat, it's changed to channel heat.
Yeah.
You know, and but yeah, I really think that, like, you know, I always told Bobby Lashley, I think it was like a semi-running gag between us. Every time I'd see him, I'd go, "Whenever you're ready, I'm ready to manage you." You know, I think it just annoyed him more than anything. But I don't know why Bobby didn't take it more into a pro wrestling style.
I think that a lot of the guys that you know, it's funny because a lot of the guys, I think, from pro wrestling, when they started doing MMA, I thought that they would do that, and Shamrock kind of did, but most of them, they get so far away from it that they don't even realize what made them a star in the first place when they go into, like, you know what I mean? They try to be so reserved. Even Punk, because Punk, you know, was such a great talker. When he was in MMA, he could talk, but it wasn't what's the word I'm looking for? I think with Punk, maybe it was just that he kind of knew he wasn't a great fighter. And it's easy as a pro wrestler, you can talk like you're a great pro wrestler and really do the promo. With MMA, I think that he realized that, like, I can't go in there and talk like I do as a pro wrestler, because it doesn't exactly work at my level of fighting. Maybe, I don't know, because I expected him to go in there and be like the greatest MMA talker there ever was, and he shied away. He totally shied away.
I think if he would have went to Bellator, he would have been more, like I told him when I ran into him a couple of years ago. I hadn't seen him in a long time, and I told him, I said, you know, you should really I'm really happy for you and for your career. My only problem with it was you should have went to Bellator. And he's like, well, with what they offered me in UFC, I couldn't turn it down.
Right.
I'm like, yeah, but you've made so much money. I'm like, you should have turned it down, and because they would have given you tomato cans in Bellator until you built yourself up. You know what I mean? And but I didn't push the issue with them. But that's my thought. But my other thought is, the reason people don't do pro wrestling is it's really hard to be a baby face, to be a character baby face like Dusty Rhodes, you know, to draw money. But nobody wants to be a heel in real life. Nobody wants to be a heel in pro wrestling. Like, I was one of the only people who genuinely preferred being booed than cheered. But most people don't. But I was just more comfortable with it because of my personality. But most people don't want to be booed, and most people don't want people to hate them, and that's the problem with why I think there's no heels in MMA, is because nobody wants to be hated.
Yeah. There were some scenes of you working with MLW. Court Bauer is in the video, and I think you're giving advice to an angle featuring Jacob Fatu, who is now in WWE. And I was wondering, do you have people coming to you for advice, or, you know, reaching out and wondering how that they could tackle this one thing that maybe they would try and get your expertise about?
No, not so much. I mean, you know, people at that kind of level want to do their own thing, and people at a lower level just don't have. Like, I always said that I don't mind teaching. I like teaching, but I like teaching advanced students, because I could not. The the patience to teach beginners, but I also feel like, like I can help advanced people go from level, like if they're on a B level, I can help them get to an A level. But I don't know. I mean, it all depends. People are, when I take bookings, I don't take as many now because of my sleep disorder, and plus the last few years I've been out of the business more or less because in 2022 I had both knees replaced. In 2023 I had my shoulder replaced. 2024 spinal stenosis flared up. And so I really didn't take a lot of bookings since 2021, and that was the COVID. So really, you're looking at before 2019 that I was even, on the road very often, more than, 6 times a year.
What, you talk about like the physical price that you pay, like what, essentially you talked about, like how long have you had the sleep disorder and what kind of, got that, do you have like a thing where that came from or anything?
The sleep disorder, I don't know. It just popped up. I started waking up and I was exhausted, and I'd wake up in the middle of the night like a dozen times, 15, 20 times a night. And then so when I'd wake up for good, I would be just as tired as when I went to bed. And so that's been a problem for 20 plus years now. And then I got the early onset Parkinson's, which the only reason I even brought it up, it made it public, because it was really nobody's business, but the only reason I made it public is because I have a tremor, and it looks weird having a tremor and not having any explanation for it. I don't want people just speculating, that whatever. But it's really early in the onset. I've had it for like 10 years. So, and it hasn't really progressed very far. So I'm hoping that it doesn't progress very far at all. You know what I mean? But that I would imagine my chair shots to the, I would think all my damage is due to chair shots to the head and drug abuse.
When you were going through that period, I mean, was the drug abuse thing, was that, do you think that was just the nature of your personality, or was that something that the what's the word I'm looking for, the atmosphere of wrestling, or a combination of both?
No, yes and no. I would have been a drug addict anyway, I think, or an alcoholic. The atmosphere definitely helped, but it was also something I was good at. Like I was good at doing drugs. I was, better than most, and which is a horrible thing to want to be better at. But it was something I was really good at, so it was something I did, and which is sad. It's really pathetic if you really think about it. But that's the choices I made at the time. Best choices. I made the best choices I could at the time.
When you look back, I mean, do you look back and have these like, oh man, like these were the glory days of my life, or do you look back and go, oh my God, how did I do this? Why did I do this? Or is it something in between?
Both. It's both.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, but I don't live in the past. I really don't. I like to me, like I don't even think of the of all that stuff unless somebody brings it up. You know what I mean? It's like, it's like when I see my buddies that I haven't seen in years, we start telling war stories, and then it's kind of like, whoa, that was idiotic. What an idiot I was, or wow, what a party that was. You know what I mean? But then I don't think about it. It's just not something that it comes into my purview.
As we wind this down and before we let you go, what do you want your fans to take away from the documentary? Like what kind of response are you looking for the folks who are pretty eager to watch this thing?
I want them to be entertained first and foremost. And I think they will be. I think it's a really fascinating documentary, and not just because I'm the subject. I think the director did a phenomenal job with it. I want that. I want them to seek help if they have mental illness. And I want people to understand me better, and realize that, that I'm. Everybody's unique. Tolerance. I guess tolerance and patience you got to have for people.
Is there anything else you would like to promote other than the documentary's out next week, Amazon Prime, Nevermore, The Raven Effect? Anything else that you got going on?
I got some indie shows coming up. I got one in Milwaukee on December 6th, whatever the Saturday is, for Dave Harrow, Milwaukee or Waukesha Blizzard Brawl.
The annual Blizzard Brawl thing that he does. Yeah, yeah.
And then I'm supposed to be at WrestleCade. I think it's WrestleCade, the thing on Thanksgiving weekend. But I haven't got my plane ticket yet, so we'll see. But I'm supposed to be at that. And then I don't really have any other bookings for a while because I wanted to take time off because this has been a pretty, I'm 61. And with the sleep disorder, it takes me days to recover from going on the road. And not because I party or anything, but just the schedule gets changed and everything like that. And it just, it exhausts me. And I have to work my system back into a normal routine again. And there's something to be said for routine. I mean, it really is. Like, I used to love being on the road. I used to love the difference. Every day would be different, like every new experience. And now I'm really content being at home, so that's another thing. I just like being at home.
Aside from like MMA, do you have any other hobbies or things that you like to watch?
Yeah, I've been watching a bunch of anime lately. There's a show called Dan to Dan that's really good. And I watch a lot of stuff like alien documentaries and Bigfoot type stuff, which I could get into, but it's not anyone we want to talk about now, or nor do we have the time.
Brian,
but it's really a fascinating subject, though.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was going to say Brian Alvarez does a show called After Dark that he can get you on and talk about that stuff all show long. That's a show on this network.
Yeah, tell him to give me a call.
All right, Dave, anything else?
I just, I would recommend the thing because the one thing when I was watching is like, for me, it's like, and I think a lot of people, it's like life goes in a certain way and change is very gradual. And usually you don't notice it because it is so gradual. So I went back and, and I remember all this stuff from 27, 28 years ago, the heyday of ECW and everything. And I remember it well, but actually watching it now through today's eyes and you look back, it is, the wrestling business has changed so much. And there really is some really, just the gripping nature of your character. I mean, like that is something that's missing in wrestling right now is the characters, because even the people who have characters, they're one-dimensional in a lot of ways.
That was what I planned. That was the one thing I wanted with my character was I wanted it to be three-dimensional. I wanted it to be where you wouldn't understand the character's actions. You may not agree with them, but you understood why he did it. Which makes it all the more of a. It's like when Bret Hart turned heel. And he only turned heel because he said he was supposed to be a babyface, and these stupid fans wouldn't cheer for him. When Shawn Michaels and they cheer for Shawn Michaels, who's a degenerate in his mind. And what was so great about it was if he was a real babyface, if his character truly was, he would have walked away, walked off into the sunset. But the fact that he kept wanting to stick around and push the fact that he should be cheered made him so despicable, and it was great. It was riveting. And it all goes back to psychology. It's psychological pain is so much better than physical.
Mm-hmm. All right.
So much worse.
Yeah, right.
I really want to thank you for doing this. This was great. The documentary is really entertaining. Again, one more time, Nevermore, The Raven Effect, Amazon Prime, November 18th. I think people who listen to this show will really enjoy it. So thanks for jumping on with us.
Yep. Thank you, man. Thanks for having me, and I'm glad you guys enjoyed it.
Yep.
All right, for Raven and Dave, I'm Garrett. To everybody, thanks for watching and listening.